Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, brought to you in partnership with our sponsors from Calabrio. Our session today is titled Spark, Trailblazing a United Frontline Service. And what that really means is we get to hear an incredibly interesting case study from New Zealand's largest telecommunications and digital services company, Spark. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's guests, Jadine, Nick and Michael, we hope this session provides you some interesting insights into the journey that Spark has been on and some of the challenges and successes they've had throughout that period. To round off the session, we'll have a Q&A and, where we can talk about any of the questions you might have or hear more about those areas of interest. So I'm Fran Southwood. I am the CEO of Auscontact and I will be your moderator today. We'll just run through some general housekeeping with you. The best sessions are ones that have lots of interactions. So we do encourage you to ask questions, put some comments in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be actually looking and tapping into those as we go through. If you've got any technical issues, if you're listening through headphones or speakers and you have any problems with that, just raise your hands on the control panel and one of the Auscontact team will come and help you. Alternatively, there would have been a contact number on the original registration email that you received, so you can simply dial in and not miss anything. That's about it from me. So I am going to now introduce you to the wonderful panel that we have with us here today. We have Jadine Graham, who is the Customer Care Manager at Spark, New Zealand. We have Nick Wilson, who has a technical role. He's Technical Reporting and Planning Analyst at Spark. And then we've also got Michael Cano, who's an Account Executive at Calabrio. The session today, as I said, we're really going to have the opportunity to share some of the insights, hear what's happened, get down to the nitty-gritty and really understand, what was the burning platform that led Spark on this journey, and then what are some of the things they've actually gotten out of it as they've gone through it. I know the journey started in 2021, but I'm going to hand over to Jadine and Nick initially to give us some insights into the environment, a little bit of maybe some background about Spark and your contact center operation itself, and I guess what made this an important next step for you as an organisation.
Thanks, Fran. So I'll start by giving a little bit of a background on Spark, who we work for. As you mentioned, we are a New Zealand-based company and we are in the telecommunications and digital services sector. To give context, we have about 5,000 employees at Spark and we operate in right from consumer, SME, enterprise and into the government markets as well. Nick and I here, we come from the consumer and SME area, so the stuff that we'll be talking about will be mainly pertaining to that market. From a frontline perspective, so we have about 1,500 frontline team members that sit across our retail and contact centre operations, and we do have an element of our contact centre operation that is outsourced, sits with an outsourced partner in the Philippines. We have stores, we do have voice in, voice out. We also do some in-home stuff. So if we're a customer who, if we have customers who need some support for the technology within their home environment, we do have reps that can go out and support them there. And we also have a messaging platform as well, which we've been growing probably over the last couple of years and increasing, or I suppose trying to push more interactions into that space. I can talk a little bit more about the journey of that later. But annually, we answer about 1.4 million calls in our contact centres. We close about 500,000. We're about 500,000 messages annually. We've got 62 of our retail stores across New Zealand, and the foot traffic there, or number of visitors per year, is about 4.5 million. Maybe just a bit of detail, the types of interactions that we would manage, anything that you probably envisage that, or that you would contact your telco company for. We obviously have sales environment, so we have both proactive and reactive with that outbound stuff, and also inbound too. Service, any kind of existing customer service requests, changes to their plans. They might want to look at additional product suites, billing inquiries, any other general inquiry type stuff, and then of course the care side of things with regards to solving faults, problems, resolving issues, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's probably us in a nutshell. I don't know if there's anything else, Nick.
Nope, that's all I've got.
Look at that, all covered. So big volumes, big environment, lots of people, so all of the challenges that come with that. What was it that made you think, actually, we need to make a change? What were the challenges you were facing? So a little bit about the why, as far as, sort of going on this journey.
Cool. I'll take a bit right too. It was actually pre-COVID that we sort of there's always challenges around how do you be more efficient, and how do we get the most out of our operation, and how do we know that we're doing the best that we can. And actually at that time, or way back when, our retail operation and our virtual, or our contact center operation, were largely separate. So they were reporting under different structures. But there was always this kind of provocation, or this, we could see that there were perhaps times when maybe that small rural store didn't have as much foot traffic and probably had a bit of capacity sitting in them. At the same time, that actually maybe our virtual contact centre could have had a bit of a tail and really needed a bit of support. And it was actually out of that kind of just, I suppose, conversation at some point to go, hey, wouldn't it be cool if those guys could just log in, take a few calls, and help us out a bit over here? With the acknowledgement that actually largely it's the same customer base that they're dealing with day to day. Most of the knowledge and product suites and information that they knew was the same. And so there was kind of a logical sort of, that kind of makes sense. But I think at the time, if you just think about that from a change program, or from what that would entail, it was quite a mammoth task. And so I think it was at that point seen as maybe a transitional situation, that okay, that's something that's an aspiration, it's somewhere that we would like to get to, but probably not something that we would do a huge big bang change program for immediately. And the catalyst really was COVID. So the ideas, the thoughts were all brewing there already. And then we got we went through COVID, and we had our lockdown situation. So with that, immediately, I suppose, over the course of a day or two, about 450 of our retail team members were no longer able to go into their store, and they now needed to be working, they now needed to be at home. And then from a people perspective, when we were at that time, we were thinking through what were we going to do. First and foremost, I think our people wanted some certainty. They wanted to make sure that they were still being useful. They still wanted to be able to sell and earn their commission. There was all of those other things that kind of went alongside it. And then bubbling away in the back was also this kind of, well, actually, is there a way that we can actually, build some resilience here? Because I did mention earlier we have an offshore team as well in the Philippines, who were also being hit quite hard by COVID. So is there a way that we can utilise this resource to actually support, at that stage was one of our only what we call touchpoints, customer touchpoints, that was operational with this resource that we've got. So within the space of maybe a couple of weeks, our unified frontline sort of started to come to life very, very quickly. I think it was a couple of days actually before we started finding laptops and cables and cords and getting addresses and starting to kind of fire stuff out.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because I think for some of the organisations over here, similarly, there'd been conversations. What a great idea. We can think about occupancy a little bit differently. We can think about, creating almost some breathing space. I think you said, downtime, uptime, support that tail a little bit. And whilst it, sometimes we've got those conversations permeating along, it took something really big for, this actual, well, now it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have for a whole lot of other reasons. So you had to kind of jump into it. You talked about, the challenge of shifting in a very short time frame to a work from home model. And, challenges like getting laptops and the rest of it. Had you already put in enough infrastructure change, etc., to actually mean your people could step into that with the right kit or technology? Or were there a whole lot of things you had to actually now think, how do we fast track some of those steps, such as, if you've got people doing face-to-face service, have they ever actually even handled the telephony component of what your organisation actually had set up?
Yeah, in short, the answer is no. So we really had no right to probably jump ahead that quickly. But I think it was I think that's the thing that I think, regardless of, and we've had quite a bit of a iteration of our first kind of go at this, if you like. But I think everybody who was involved in it is so proud, because we were getting through so much stuff that we thought should take a long time, places that we didn't think we would be able to get to probably for years, and we were just kind of bowling down those walls. And you're right, there were so many aspects of it that didn't have in place. So one of the things we did have in place already is we have a very solid agent at home program, and we've had that for some time in our virtual space. So that did help, that there were technology, I suppose the technology was there, and also some of those processes of being able to remote manage in a virtual environment, they all stood there. So we could take some of that. But to your point about the retail team, it was something we quickly realized, but we did underinvest immediately when we in the capability upskill. So we knew that they had the same skill set largely, and we thought, right, let's just train them on our call taking platform, and then we'll get them in and they can start taking calls. But actually being able to read cues and clues in a retail environment versus in a contact center environment is very different. And just having that voice versus all of those other sensors that you can use was something that became evident very quickly through our call observations that we were doing through the time. And so a need to kind of drive a little bit, we called it an engaging conversations program, and get our retail team through it, of how to actually, how to pick up those cues and clues. We rolled that out quite quickly as well. And I think that what we saw, what we were hearing when we were listening, was some great solution-based reps who were fantastic in retail at doing their job became processors when they were behind the headset, because they were just unable to kind of pick up all of the other bits and pieces. So we did have to kind of upskill them or train them on that, and it was just honing in on stuff that they know, because everybody tends to talk on a phone anyway, so you do know how to do that thing, but it was just picking up on the little nuances that they needed to be aware of that maybe they kind of weren't conscious of before. So yes, there was that.
You're right, though, it's the subtleties. And I think transitioning in a normal environment, if you said, I'm going to turn all my retailers into contact center operators, it would be met with, the classic, well, what's our change management plan? What's our strategy here? How do we make it seamless and comfortable? And are we going to have 300 conversations? But as you say, you had to do it really quickly. And there's a real challenge with that mindset. But obviously the burning platform was, there's kind of this big thing called COVID. But equally, it probably helped some of that transition as well. If you think about from those of your people working in the retail shop fronts, they needed some security themselves. So they were probably quite open to what that transition actually looked like. Whereas sometimes that might not have been the case. It might have been met with a little bit more resistance, let's
Yeah,
say.
well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think actually we did face that. So, moving further along in the journey. So initially there was nowhere else for them to go or be. And
Yeah.
so it made sense at that point. Once we sort of started coming out of COVID, if you like, and foot traffic started to increase, and there was that need in that retail space, we have actually changed the model because it actually didn't work so well once our retail stores became busier. One, from a mindset perspective, because we had retail team members who their passion is dealing with people face to face and having that contact. Yeah. So there was that kind of creeped back in. And then even just well, there were so many kind of challenges, I think, from how do you flow, because the whole concept of unified frontline is being able to flow to where the customer demand is. But if I'm sitting in a retail store and I can see a customer there, but I'm on a phone call here and it's a tricky one that's taken me a bit of time, just that feeling for those reps just didn't feel right. And so we had to kind of iterate a little bit more, and we've kind of changed the way in which we the skill set mix, I suppose, now, and have moved less we no longer do voice and retail together. It's actually messaging and retail are the two that sit within our retail space, which makes much more sense. And it's the retail stuff, the messaging stuff's less time precious than what a voice call would be. So yeah, we just definitely took some learnings from that.
Yeah, okay. No, that's really interesting. So you've brought up a really great point, though. COVID was a point in time. You've transitioned out of there, and you've had to rethink your whole WFM approach, really. Like your whole, how you think about your people, how you think about your resources, how you balance. You've tested a few things. What was your approach looking at workforce management? So how did you kind of throw it all in the air and say, what does it look like, versus, okay, now we've got some time and space. What are those key learnings that you identified needed to shift quickly? But equally, what were the things that you hadn't yet nailed, that this was a new opportunity for you?
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the the RFP process?
Yeah, sure. So,
you're on mute.
Unmute, thank you. Yeah, sure. So as well as the idea of moving to a unified frontline, we also were in the process just before COVID of organising an RFP to replace a lot of our technology stack. So at the time we were still on Genesys Engage on-premise, which we'd had for 30, 40 years, which had been moulded into a platform that we knew how it worked inside and out, because we're also a reseller. So a lot of our team had worked on it for many, many years. So we were looking for either a combined interaction handling platform, so all forms, voice, messaging, chat, email, whatever, and WFM, or separate WFM and platforms. So we ended up going with Genesys and Calabrio at the time. But that process of the RFP had only sort of been in its infancy before COVID. So the whole COVID situation and everybody being sent home and then coming back into stores, and the acceleration of the UFL project sort of sped up that RFP a bit. So we had a bit of a clearer idea of what we wanted from the tools that we were looking for. And one of those things was really being able to schedule on-queue and off-queue activities, but the off-queue activities still in a demand state. So the in-store stuff, understanding when people come into store and understanding how many people we need at a time to be able to schedule them properly, which they hadn't really been done before. So having a platform that is easily usable for the front line, for people that hadn't really been in WFM before, was quite an important aspect as well. So part of that was the mobility, so being able to have a mobile app so they can access it wherever they are, which Genesys Engage didn't really have a decent answer for at the time. And during the RFP process, the Genesys Cloud WFM was quite a bit lacking in that aspect too. So it was very useful in those two point of views, being able to forecast that kind of demand that we hadn't really done much of before, but also being able to schedule them multi-skill across the same agents. voice and messaging and in-store.
Yeah, and I think just to, we've talked a little bit about the journey and that we've changed the whole way. I think one of the things that we really needed was something that was flexible, that we would be able to actually potentially turn everything on its head, and we weren't going to have to start completely from scratch and kind of start it all again, which has actually been one of our saving graces with Calabrio, just the ease of being able to, I think probably there's two big reiterations or evolutions that we have made to the way in which we structure ourselves, and they've been pretty seamless and easy to administer, which was absolutely something that we needed, because we didn't know. We thought we knew what we wanted the end state to look like, but we just didn't know if that was actually going to work and going to fly, and it didn't quite. We're still on that journey now.
So what did you think was the end state that you wanted?
Look, ideally it was
it's probably something everybody faces, right? We sit down, we write a business case, we write what we think is going to be the whole benefits realization piece, and we set this as this kind of end of the, that light on the hill kind of thing. So I would love to hear how different it is to what you then worked through in your journey to say actually where we thought we were heading wasn't quite that.
So we had this vision of having what we called end-to-end home bases. So those 62 stores that I talked of before, they were going to be called end-to-end home bases. And within that home base, you essentially serviced, ultimately the end goal was local people. So you would be the hub for the people that are all around you, and you would have these community connections, and any voice contacts would come into you, any that would be a retail space in there, the in-home team would go out locally. So it was more of a localized support structure, rather than something that was kind of national. And building those connections and the relationships within the community was ultimately where we're looking to. But I think one of the things that we learned throughout it, and it came probably when we first did our first unified frontline onboard, it got to about the 13-week phase, and one of those leaders of one of the stores is like, I recruited that person 3 months ago and you're still training them to get them fully fledged on what you need them to do. And so it was very quick, where they were great. They knew everything, but it was probably an overinvestment. And in that time, the poor store lead had now lost another 2 people, and the whole ecosystem just didn't work. And then also it was hard on the leads. So the leaders of those people, not only were they recruiting and all of the rest, but for all of the information that you're imparting to their individuals, that lead has to be able to support all of that as well. And they're running a store and then a mini contact center, and then they've got someone out supporting, going out to visit homes. And it was a lot of pressure that we probably put on our people and our leads, and also our people with the cross-skill upskill process. We've all got complicated organizations, and there's so many bits and pieces and product knowledge and all the rest of the stuff that we need to know, and we're probably not as streamlined and as simple as what we need to be able to have that type of a super rep, if you like. But where we've got to now is that we certainly, through the process, one of the first things that happened, which was super cool, was the connection between what was 2 separate areas within the business that were frontline. So our retail and our contact center frontline reps coming together and actually sharing and understanding the nuances of both of their kind of ways of working. And, situations where it made sense that actually we would say, hey, do you want to go and speak to our guy in the retail store? He'll be able to help you with X, Y, and Z. Or, hey, do you know, if you don't have I'll fix you with this now, but you can actually message us later on and you'll get one of our other guys. And that kind of respect, I think, just by them doing each other's job and kind of being in each other's environment a little bit more was a great part of what came out of just even that point in time.
Yeah, and look, I think your whole story sort of personifies that piece that says fail fast and really be looking at it quickly. So Yeah, I think that's really good intel just for the people listening as well, to know that sometimes we think we know where we're going, but it's those little pieces along the way, where you've got to have a little bit of courage sometimes to say, actually, that's not the end goal anymore. And sometimes that can be hard depending on the positional, kind of construct within your organisations. But it sounds like the whole way along you were very tuned in to where those failure points were along the way. So if you think about it, and probably it was super lucky that you'd actually already started your RFP process prior to COVID, so you already had some of that work underway. So the appetite for technology, et cetera, was already well and truly within the organisation. But Nick sort of picked up the point there that sort of the one solution from Genesis wasn't actually going to give you what you needed. When you think about where you've landed now, and you quickly could see some of those gaps as far as what the service structure would give you, what the technology would give you to support what you were trying to do. How did or I guess what made Calabrio the right fit for you guys? What did it deliver that actually meant some of this stuff could happen seamlessly within the environment? Or you probably had a few little hiccups, but for the most part you actually got some extra stuff out of that made your kind of management of this easier. What were those key things?
So there's a couple of things. The forecasting is probably easier for us in Calabrio than it was in Genesis Engage. We had two specialist analysts that looked after the data, one in particular for forecasting, and we don't really need those anymore. The planners look after the forecasting themselves now, so it's a less hands-on needed kind of system for forecasting, and it's reasonably accurate. They spend enough time in there, but not a whole lot of time to be able to get that forecast just right for the demand that they're planning for. And so I guess that also brings around efficiencies end to end. The system itself is a bit easier for the planners to use as far as being able to copy and paste out of and into Excel, which everybody is used to using Excel one way or another for WFM, even if you have a WFM system. So you still take information out or put information in one way or another. But just the basic setting up process of agents is all in the hands of the planners now, rather than having to wait on other teams. We have a user access provisioning team which sets up user access within the Spark business, and they often had to wait for them to set up the person before they could set them up in WFM and get the shifts going, whereas now that's a much quicker proposition for them and they don't have to wait for anybody else to do that. But yeah, there's a lot of efficiency gains for the planning team.
And how did your shop fronts adjust or respond to this new forecasted environment? In my head, I'm just thinking of some of the environments I've sort of been a part of, and I thought, oh, would have been an interesting one. How did they, because suddenly it's about giving over a bit of control as well, right? And some of that perceived control, not real, but yeah, how did they respond?
Yeah. We've done a lot of learnings through this, and we're in the middle of a bit of another test and learn with it. So we did go right through to everything centralized. Resourcing sits within the people and planning team, and this is when you need to go on your breaks, and and we actually developed a kind of an adherence monitoring tool for them to make sure that why you're not on your breaks, real time sitting there chasing them all the time, like, why aren't you on your break? So we had that to start off with, and again we had to take a step back and go, to what end are we doing this? Because actually we're chasing this rep who's not on a break, but they're not on a break because they're with a customer, and actually that's just the right thing to happen in that environment. Different when it was, when they needed to be in the voice area, we were counting on them, and they were part of a larger pool, but it was that balance between there's an immediate localized need in their store that they need to service, and then there's the virtual queues that actually they are also forming a part of. So we trialed many things. We tried yeah, just communication between real time and the store to go, hey, you can't put that person on, but can you get that person on, kind of a situation to try and make sure that we were always balancing the resource properly. And once we went away from voice and into messaging, it got a little bit easier. And we're actually now in a space where we're trying a bit more of a trusted model. So again, rather than real time banging their head against a wall, trying to get people to do something when actually they are doing the right thing by our customers at the time that are in front of them, we have put some ownership, and we've given through Calabrio, provided them with more permissions to be able to make changes within the schedule. And we look at it more from a retrospective perspective with how things have performed. So if I think about the fact that we're saying to leads, we need you to make sure that you've got, where you have your people in supporting messaging when you don't have the foot traffic in your store, as an example. We go and have a look at our data, or the planners would, and they would see, oh, the foot traffic was down at that time, but we're not seeing any online hours in your messaging. So help me understand why that is. And then we work through, like we've talked about, the nuances of those particular stores, because there might be genuine reasons as to why every Friday at 9 till 10 there's no one there, but actually they can't support in messaging. Or it could be that actually, we need to make sure that we're more on top and that we're actually supporting the customers in the right place and we're flowing. So we've decentralized, I suppose, some of that stuff, and we're testing it out at the moment with our retail stores. And it's the last 2 months, so we finished the trial in the end of this month. So far, so good. It's once we got the mindset and the understanding of our leads and our people right, then their behavior changed as well as a result of it. And so we don't have to, it's not telling them to be somewhere, they understand why they need to be where they need to be, because they're not just a retail rep, they are someone who supports Spark's customers wherever our customer turns up. So yeah, it was a journey.
That's an amazing, that's a really strong mindset position. And I think I love that you talk about going back to that empowered and trusted of your people. And we have actually got a number of members that are starting to do that same sort of thing, but testing it a little bit in the contact center environment as well. Are you finding any results in your approach with your retail stores that are making you think a bit differently about your contact center environment, or it's still sort of running as most traditional contact centers do? And by that, I mean around the trusted and empowered kind of position.
I think that's our aspiration. So I think, yes, we have. I think we're traditionally we're quite tight and we have every single metric and every single number available to us.
Like every good contact centre.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I love about the way that we manage our contact centre currently and have done for a bit of time is that absolutely king is our INPS. So all other results are great indicators, but our INPS is our absolute king result. And so that's purely from our customer perspective that we're saying, like, how are we going there? And what that means is that some of those other metrics that we kind of tied so tightly to before, they become less important, because you can kind of overlay that INPS result across it and go, well, actually, this is what your profile essentially looks like, and our customers love it. And it might be different for everybody. It makes it challenging from a planning perspective sometimes, but we just take those high level numbers and we go, this is how this is what we need to accommodate for, or this is what it kind of looks like. And we're doing quite a lot of I suppose doing a lot of work around our INPS number and trying to really dig into it and understand a little bit deeper of customer journeys and which touch points better and all of that sort of stuff. So we're doing a lot of work on it, but I think that's probably the key difference, because also it's a leveler across retail and in the contact centres as well. So it's a metric that is across the two, which has made things a bit easier.
Yeah, I love that. We had a question from Deepak, and it was probably back just on that last discussion around, kind of taking that workforce management function away from the retailers and centralising it. And I think you've covered this a little bit, but it was about the pushback from that retail head or the teams when you took that workforce management function, and how did you manage the change? Well, you've talked a lot about doing it, but then actually going back to it. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
So we do still have so prior to Calabrio, our retail team, Nick touched on it before, but our retail team did have a scheduling tool, if you like, but they didn't, it wasn't based on forecast or anything like that. It was just here's your rosters kind of a situation. And what, so taking that away from them, I think, yes, absolutely, immediately, there were some who, were very nervous about what we were going to be providing them with, and the inflexibility I think that they thought that brought them, and this is where the relationship between the planners and our base leads or our store leads became really, really important, because they needed to actually have a level of trust, and they needed to not feel like we were telling them what to do. We wanted to take it back to data. So based on the data, this is what we can see. And do you think, based on your experience, do you think, does that make sense to you? And oh, okay, that didn't work. Let's try this out. And so it was, rather than it being we're telling you to do this and why you're not doing it, it had to be a partnership, because every store literally in the demographic around that store makes it unique. And so although the data sometimes told us one thing, the reality in the operations was another. So the really important part of that was actually getting those relationships with the planners and the store leads together. And I think that is actually what has helped us to move forward into this point of trust now, where we're kind of going to the base leads. Well, actually, we trust that you're going to make the right decisions and do the right things, and we'll bring you the data to tell you where it's not quite adding up for us. That was sort of the foundation of probably where we are now, which we probably didn't even realize at the time, to be honest, but yeah, it's worked out well.
And have you had to invest in those leaders to actually help them understand the data and what it tells them and what their levers are, how they can actually participate in this new relationship? Because it sounds like you've come to a really healthy, as you called it, a partnership. It sounds like it's a really healthy partnership too. But have you had to invest a little bit in that as a different skill or suite of skills for the retail leaders themselves?
Yeah, it hasn't been a targeted program, I'd say, but I think just they've all been on the journey with us. Yeah. And so I think that's just helped. We've all grown and learned and understand as we've understood more, and can talk each other's business a little bit more than probably we ever would have been able to before. And so I think that's one of the cool things. And yeah, that respect, I suppose, for each other and the role that each other does. And I know the planners, they meet weekly with all of the store leads and the area leads, if you like, and make sure that they have a presence and that they're available to go through any data or any information that maybe the leads want any feedback on. So I think just even wider as the whole of consumer channels, we were talking about this sort of stuff all the time. So if you didn't know about it, you could question it, and you had support structures in place. Yeah.
So if you think about how far you've come then, two really separate, siloed parts of your business, now you're actually this really successful, connected, partnership that's actually delivering great things for your customer. And I love that your customer features there in your stat that's about them. What are the top benefits that you and the team are seeing now that you've come out of it? I get that you're still going and there's still bits, but what are the top benefits you're seeing now?
Certainly. So, I mean, I think customer satisfaction absolutely is one of them. I think we can see that our NPS has grown substantially over that time. We have been able to, there's lots of kind of offshoots of what's happened, in the journey that we've gone through. So one of them, as an example, is our messaging platform has grown substantially over that period of time, and it has opened up another channel for us to actually direct particular customers through to, or particular journeys through to, which is actually a bit more of an efficient channel for us, but also customers obviously like it because we have a very high INPS through there. So that's helped us from an efficiency perspective as well, but it's also given us, from a, let's talk about a retail rep, another feather to their bow. So they aren't, if we talk about one of those rural towns who maybe were quieter, they've got other opportunities to actually have a customer in front of them at times when before they wouldn't have. And just, I think actually the biggest benefit out of the whole thing is actually the experience that we've all gained through all of our ups and downs, and there's been probably many downs as well, but we've never felt like they were failures. We always felt that they were opportunities to pivot and do something different, and largely that's the culture that we operate in, where that is acceptable and it's actually good, and we know that it moves us forward ultimately, and we're all in it together. I think that literally, that sounds cheesy, but we actually were this group of people that were like, what are we going to do? And we all just, we were all trying to move us forward towards what we knew what the end goal was, not getting there, stumbling along, but then picking each other up and kind of going forward. I think the biggest benefit I've had it's one that I'll take with me for in whatever career or job I go into, is the learnings for me anyway. I don't know about you, Nick. What do you think?
No, I think you've covered most of it. I can't really think of anything else to add to that. The only other thing the point I guess missed for the retailers was managing annual leave, which everybody has difficulties with, but it's vastly different in a retail environment where you have to, the office itself shuts down for Christmas, but the retailers have to be open more and more. So you kind of have a leave ban over that period, which leaves the rest of the year having to manage leave, which had been previously difficult for the retailers to do, but having a team looking after all that for them and helping them with it, scheduling leave a bit better, helps that out too.
Does it give you any flexibility for staff to go the opposite way? So, we've talked a lot about your retailers almost picking up more of that contact center function. I know you've shifted to your chat, etc. But has there been any flexibility with people in a contact center being able to give coverage in retail if it's geographically available and relevant and all of those things? But do you see any of that sort of other way support?
Yeah,
just picking
absolutely.
up the point there about leave,
Yeah, and some contact center team members who didn't realize that they enjoyed retail until they actually got out there and gave it a go, and they're like, oh, actually this is for me. So yeah, and particularly at the start, where I would say from a resourcing position at the start, we probably needed it more into the virtual space, which is why it was going that way. And so we never got a lot back the other way to start off with. That wasn't through lack of maybe the reps not wanting to, it was actually more from where the resource requirement was sitting. But yeah, we have had, I think actually what we're facing with more is actually people moving into wider Spark, and with just the knowledge and experience and even the flexibility that they have through, being able to go through the ups and downs, they've also come out of it with a whole lot of learnings. And so we've had quite a bit of success with our frontline teams moving into other areas and supporting wider Spark outside of frontline.
Definitely what I like to call that positive attrition, right? It's building the foundation both in your retail and your contact centers, that innate understanding of customer can take them anywhere. There's another question here, and Michael, this might be one you can give us some thoughts on, and it's really about, from a Calabrio perspective. Obviously, you've been on this journey with Spark, and there would be different things that you've been, part of influencing and providing options and solutions for. But what's your view? And the question specifically is about what plans are there for Spark as they further mature down into that experienced user, category. What's next? What is? Are there other things that you're already thinking of that you think actually there's a great opportunity here through that partnership?
Oh yeah, for sure, and there is, and it's probably down to Spark to help answer what's next as well. But you mentioned the journey, Fran, and one of the things that is always helpful in contributing to what's next is the customer's willingness to look at different things, to look at change. JD mentioned it a couple of times that there was some change process coming and whatnot, and some of the feedback that I got from the project team was that JD and the team were always open to change, and it might have been a bit of a challenge to work through, but they always welcome that. So look, I mean, there's other things that the platform can deliver, other functionalities within WFM that we can bring to bear, but we're working through that with Spark, and lots of good stuff to come.
So JD and Nick, I guess from your perspective, what are those aspirations for you guys? What's what's next for Spark in relation to what's that new thing that you're like, we can do that as well? Because you've pretty much demonstrated that, and I love hearing about everything you speak about is about that culture that is united. I know you've said it a lot of times, but it actually comes through with all of the stuff you've been talking about. The culture of your organisation kind of shines, even the language you use talking about those challenges and what you do to make sure it's about your people and your customer. But what's next? What's next for you guys?
Do you want me to take it? Okay. So I think probably we did actually think about this one, because it's like we've been rolling on this ball for a long time, but and it just keeps rolling. But I think one of the things that we're working on at the moment is so we do have an aspiration, in that line of trust and wanting to empower our people again, and make sure that those who know the best about the business are the ones who are making the decisions and are trusted to do that. So there is a desire to give some type of ownership or control, if you like, back to our reps where we could in this space. And we know that through the RFP process and with dealing with Richard and Mike and the Calabrio team, that self-service stuff is something that Calabrio is quite passionate about as well. So we have sort of embarked on, we're putting our toes in the water, I suppose, with it. We're looking at the moment and working with Richard and our offshore partner actually on doing some shift bidding stuff based on performance, where reps will go in and be able to say which ones they want, and then we look at the performance rating and then allocate the shifts out that way. So going through a bit of a test and trial run of that at the moment, and then if we could get to a point where actually reps are allowed to have more of a say in how they're rostered and what their schedule looks like, that would be an ideal state for us, because I think with that comes so many other benefits. And then we've started to think a little bit about, so then what does that mean from a resourcing planning perspective? How does that look in the future? And starting to kind of try and work out then what Calabrio would look like in that world, and what support, what roles even would you have, and what would they look like, and what would they be if you end up at that end state. So teetering on the edges at the moment of it, but certainly something that we know we'd get so many gains out of it if we could get it right.
Absolutely, I love that actually. So once you've worked that out, come talk to us. We'd love to. As far as post and throughout, engagement levels with your people, do you check in through surveys, pulses, etc.? What are you seeing?
So we actually, throughout the COVID period, we didn't have our culture survey operating, unfortunately, so it was quite difficult. But what the process that we used was just back to basics of, right, tell us what's going on, how you're feeling, and that's where we got the ideas of how we were going to iterate and change at each level. So it wasn't us coming up with, oh, maybe we should try this, or maybe we should give them more ownership. It was the lead saying, trust me. If you trust me, and help me with this, and we'll make it work. And so it was actually just listening to them the whole time. It wasn't a measure as such, but I think the proof to us is in the fact that we've done all of that stuff, we've made the changes, and we're in a much better place operationally, from our people perspective, from our customers perspective, efficiency perspective, than what we were way back then. So there has been improvements in all of those kind of key metrics the whole way through as well.
Interesting. I wonder if you'd had your cultural survey, if that stuff would have come out, because sometimes it's the old school conversation, right, that kind of lets you go there with it. Sometimes when it's, in a survey, to have to think about that one. So performance, you touched on that. What's your performance outcomes? What's changed as far as the landscape for Spark? Have you got tangible changes that you're seeing some good results with?
So so one of the challenges that we had, actually, we never mentioned this the whole way. Oh no, we did actually, maybe in the RFP process, when we at the same time we brought Calabrio in and went to our unified frontline, we actually also brought in a new telephony platform at the same time. So it's been a very sort of up and down journey, I suppose, for us, and trying to get our performance statistics aligning what they were prior to the change versus now. Whenever you do any kind of change like this, right, things sort of change up a bit, which is part of the reason why we go to our INPS, why we go to our those types of metrics. But if we looked at our any of our like ENPS results, any of our sales results, they're all we've smashed all of our results actually within the last year, as an example. So we're achieving all of our outcomes that we would want to achieve. If I think about from a efficiency perspective within the resourcing management team, we've reduced the FTE by 1, which is one of 7. So it's a considerable reduction in there. So certainly much more efficient in what we're doing. And I think what we've opened ourselves up to in time savings is that we've been able to reinvest the time. So it's not necessarily a handle time reduction or anything like that, but we didn't want to see that. What we wanted to see is that we're having more meaningful connections with our customers, which we see as a result of our INPS results, which has consistently grown over the last 2 years. I think we're up about 8 points, which is quite
fantastic. Certainly material. What percentage of your agents work from home in your contact centers? Just a question.
So we would have about 50% onshore.
And are they the whole time work from home, or is it a bit of a mix? Is it a couple of days in the office, a bit of a hybrid? What's it look like for Spark?
We have both. So we have some who are dedicated agents at home who maybe live sort of regionally out and don't travel into the office. And then we have what were traditionally based office reps who throughout COVID obviously worked from home, and then there's a bit of a hybrid going on with some of those people as well. So we have a mix of them all, and some who are always in the office.
Yeah, I think that's similar to a lot of organisations that we're talking to. There's one more here. I think you've covered this. It's asking what are the hurdles you aim to cross in the next 6 to 12 months, but I think you've kind of given us some insights into what you're hoping the next sort of part of this journey, kind of connects with and allows you to do specifically with your people, and continuing to I guess challenge some of those things. But like I said before, that pilot with your offshore sounds fantastic, particularly conceptually the idea of shift bidding based on something, whether it's based on performance or seniority and tenure. I don't know. I'd be really interested to hear how that one goes.
Well, they already spotted a little flaw in our plan. So we did one lot of it. I'll share this. This kind of funny. But so we did one shift bid and it worked brilliantly, and we're all very happy about it. And then we did the next one, and they all applied for the same shift, and so obviously it didn't work, so we had to then manually go in. So it was a flaw in the way that we set it up, obviously. So we've now learned for the 3rd iteration that we might need to make some amendments to that. So we like I say, we're working with Calabrio. We're on the journey trying to make it work, but it made me laugh because it was like, oh, that's such a the same, everyone wants the same shift, Monday to Friday 8 to 5. Same rules always apply.
Yeah, whether it's automated or manual, I think you're right. And I think it's the same issue regardless of what country you're in and what industry you're in. I think we see a lot here that just want that school time and the challenge of late shifts across the board. Any last minute tips, anything you've learnt that you think that's something I'll never forget? Any advice to anyone that's starting out to think about with, even if it's through their procurement process? What are the sorts of things, a takeaway for people?
I think the biggest thing for me throughout this whole thing was just actually the connections. The most important part was the connections that we all made with each other throughout it. And so planners making strong connections with the base leads, me as someone who was kind of helping to design what it looked like, making sure I understood the problems or the challenges that they faced in their environment and really listen to what they're saying, because people aren't making stuff up when they say this is an issue, this is a problem, that it genuinely is for them. So you need to sort of try and figure out a way to engineer all of those things out. And even if you can't all the time, what I found is just by listening and making sure that you told them you understood what the frustration or what the issue was, that was 75% of the challenge anyway. They knew that you knew about it, and yes, we'll try and fix it at some point. And I'll be honest, we had some of this through when we did the deployment of Calabrio as well. It's like any new system, there's always things that are a challenge at that time, and you work through them and you fix them. And with some of the stuff that we've had with Calabrio, where we've worked together, the excitement that comes from people when you go, hey, remember that issue you told me about? Well, now we're doing it this way. And they really felt listened to, they feel like they're heard, they know that you care, all of that sort of stuff comes out. And so I think that's probably my biggest learning through this whole journey. And I just wanted to touch as well, so the whole implementation process with Calabrio and even ongoing, we had the pleasure of having someone sit side by side with us. Like I said at the beginning, we didn't really know what it was that we were end state. So having people that were helping us, we were giving them kind of a theoretical, this is sort of how we want it to work, and having them able to then turn that into, okay, this is how we think you should set it up, and this is how it could work for you. And having that guidance alongside was super helpful for us, and really kind of set us up for success.
So they really listened and understood your business as well, though, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely, and knew what it was that we were trying to achieve. And we gave him some headaches. I think literally some days he was like, you're doing what? No one does that. But still, sought other business experts to try and come up with how we could make it work. And we did. And just working with even some of the designers and some of the around creating a meetings module as an example that really worked for us. Our planners absolutely loved the meetings module in there, but I think that's because they actually helped to give the requirements for what they wanted and got it designed. But that works for me. Just working alongside Calabrio with stuff that we wanted as well, and having subject matter experts that could kind of support us, but also flex with us when we were still a little bit unsure about how it was going to land.
I love that. What about you, Nick? Any takeaways or advice?
No, I think it was, I was reiterating the same point as I was thinking through what Jadine was saying, but it's focusing on the outcome that you're trying to achieve, and don't get stuck on the details of how you used to do things. If you know what you want to get to, there's usually a way to get there. You just need to work with them to get that to happen, which is kind of what we ended up doing. I think a lot of our thinking originally was, we used to do it this way, or we used to do this, that, the other. How do we do that in this? So trying to transfer over what you used to do rather than what you're trying to achieve with the new tool.
That's actually really good advice, because I think sometimes the biggest barrier is actually being able to let it go. Makes me feel like singing, but let the process go and be about the outcome. And I think both of you have really, covered off the piece about relationship. And, when you talked about your customers, it was all about relationships there. It was all about building new relationships internally with your two business groups kind of joining together. But equally, the partnership with Calabrio was really about that relationship as well. So trusted, empowered relationships, but where everybody's kind of connected to that end game. So I'm just mindful of time. Michael, is there anything you want to leave us with? Were any tips from a Calabrio perspective on how this relationship kind of shaped up? Because to me, it sounds like that's what underpinned it, but equally, that piece that Nick just called out, that was connect to the outcome, not the process, which I love.
100%. I mean, I didn't just reiterate that essentially, right? And what I'd mentioned previously is just their willingness to change and look at things differently. It's always one thing to say this is where we're coming from, but not and get hung up on that. But just have a look forward to the destination, the art of what's possible, to do things a little bit differently. And I mean, the last thing I would say is thank you so much to you, JD and Nick, for joining us today, and being a great customer and partner of ours. It's a joy to call on you from an AE point of view. So that's what I would close out with. So thank you.
And seconded from me, I've loved hearing the story, JD and Nick, and Michael. And I'm sure people listening, I know we've got quite a few registered that wanted the recording of this because they couldn't come today. But, again, I think the industry itself, when we hear use cases, actually helps us think about what it is we're trying to do and gives us a new connection point to sort of think about, well, actually, what were they saying there and what worked well. So thank you so much for your time today. I have loved hearing about all that you've gone through. Can't wait to hear the next stage of it, though. So I'm going to keep watching and reach out because I want to hear about that. Thanks, everybody, for coming along, and we look forward to our next session. Thanks all.
Thanks, Fran.
Thank you.
Thank you.